Hello, hello. Happy Monday, everybody. Patrick here with the Mental Health Toolbox. Hey, if you are thinking about becoming a social worker, there's a couple things you want to consider before you jump on that wagon. So before you go and get one of these beauties, there's some things you might want to consider. And so I'm going to be walking through some of those considerations with you, whether that means you are currently a student or considering getting an MSW in social work, or you are already a social worker. There's some considerations I want to share with you around some common questions, around career paths and decisions, and how to make the most out of your degree. Things I wish I had known before I started out in social work. So without further ado, let's jump in. Just a few housekeeping reminders. If you have questions, please do put on both ends, bookend your questions with 4 question marks in the comments. It's a lot easier for me to find them that way if things get a little busy in the chat. All right. All that being said, thanks for joining us today with the live. I hope you get value from this. And remember, you can always reach out with questions, topic requests using the contact form on the website, but more on that later. So let's go ahead and jump in. Today we're talking about social work careers and what to expect. So we'll be going through some basic questions around social work, and I'll be aiming to answer the most popular ones, such as why choose social work as a career, what are some of the career options in social work, and is social work a good career choice in general? So short answer, yes, I think it's a fantastic career, hence I'm in social work. But it's not created equal for everybody in terms of what direction you take it. Social work is a very diverse, malleable degree and profession. So we're going to kind of dive into the nuances of that together. So hopefully you get some value from that. And please, if you know any other social workers, anybody considering the field of social work, please do share this video with them. It'll be live up on YouTube as soon as this stream finishes. So you can always grab the share button there and pass it along to anybody who you think might benefit if they're considering a career in this field. All right, so some things we're going to go over in this tutorial, I guess if you want to call it that, this little snippet of education around my experience. We'll be starting off with the graduate school phase, right? Talking a little bit about how that works, maybe how to consider the different schools you want to attend, pros and cons around that. We'll be talking about the postgraduate phase, such as looking for employment, how to navigate those things, what to expect, and really just broaden your scope a little bit because you don't know what you don't know, and it'll help us kind of think ahead and begin with the end in mind that way. We're also going to be looking at the 3 levels of social work in terms of where you might want to do the work of social work on the macro, mezzo, or micro levels. All right. We'll be talking about the pros of a career in social work as well as the cons of a career in social work. And of course, career options, because I feel like it's really important to understand, and this is not something I was aware of until I got deeper into social work, that there are a lot of different avenues you can take down, a lot of ancillary things you can do in this career, and how you can really kind of make the most and create a career by your design or a lifestyle around the different opportunities. So we'll be talking about that. All right. So a little bit about me, if you don't already know. I'm a social worker, aka LCSW, that stands for Licensed Clinical Social Worker. I also have a master's in criminal justice, and a little bit more about that later when we talk about dual degree programs. I also do contract work for the Superior Court. Technically, it's coined as an expert witness. I'll talk more about that later, but that's more of the contract type work we'll get into. I also have a telehealth private practice, which is great because then I can work from home, have more time with the family, less back and forth stuff. Plus, you know, all the benefits of telehealth. You can see people all over, right? I have 12 plus years in the mental health space post-grad. I consider myself an underdog, meaning I had to be scrappy, you know, to figure things out along the way. And yeah, the importance of that. I think most people in this space, you know, had some hard knocks, and that's why we want to be of service to others, right? I'm a family man. That's a number 1 priority for me, hence the telehealth stuff. I like to be as home as much as I can. I'm also a fur daddy to my doggies who are currently sleeping on the rug behind me. And I am an educator, such as this. Case in point, I love YouTube. I love podcasting. It's something I got more into during the pandemic. Started off as a blog podcast a little before the pandemic hit, but definitely that was my pandemic project, was getting into podcasting, and I love it. This is my passion. I want to do more of this, more lives. So the more feedback I get from you about what you would like to benefit from these lives, the better I can serve you. And it really helps when I know I'm being of service. So, all right. So let's jump off with the graduate school phase. All right. So when we're talking about graduate school, the first consideration we want to look at is public versus private. When we're looking at public schools, right, there's usually a timeline, and that's one of the first considerations is if you're looking to transfer to a graduate program, just like an undergrad, a lot of them are not open enrollment. So there's a timeline there. So that's a con, right, in terms of the time it's going to take for you if you have any gap year or that transition period. One of the pros, I would say, is the cost, right? Public schools tend to be more cost effective, whereas private schools tend to not be as cost effective, but there is usually the luxury of access. So you can jump right in, maybe, and like in such as was my case, the private school where I went was Loma Linda University, and they were the closest to where I lived. So it was about convenience. And it paid off. I had a great education there, and I'm sure most MSW programs are great education, but it really comes down to making sure you're looking at those pros and cons, public versus private. Do some tours. I would strongly encourage you, getting a personal tour in the facility and get to a feel for the staff and the setting and whether you're going to look at virtual or in person. Those things are important distinctions. All right. Also considering the traditional versus online hybrid programs. I know since the pandemic, a lot of schools have moved online. That's cool. I think it's great to have more access. If you're a busy parent, for example, you have kids, online school might be a better choice for you, right? If it fits your schedule. There's definitely something to be said for being in the classroom, such as connecting with other graduate students, having that one-on-one. For me, one of the best things about being in-house with a MSW program was the ability to do role play with my colleagues, which was really fundamental in preparing for the work of social work, for doing therapy, was to practice those skills with my peers. And to me, it just seems like that would be more difficult if it's strictly online, but maybe in a hybrid program, that could work. Other things to consider with graduate school, of course, are your internships, right? So you typically have a year of internships somewhere, and it might be easier theoretically if you're doing an on-campus kind of setting, because then you have more face-to-face collaboration with your field liaison, director, instructors. Just food for thought. That's something you want to definitely check out if you're looking at a online type MSW program, is how do they work in the field internship, right? Is that something they facilitate for you? Like in my case, my school found them for me, so I didn't have to do the footwork. But maybe if you're doing an online type program, maybe they don't have that luxury and you have to kind of go find your own internship and report back to them. I don't know, but that's definitely something you want to consider. All right. So terminal degrees. A terminal degree is a college degree where you only need a certain level in order to, quote, be at the standard, right, for that profession, right? For medical doctors, it's the MD. For attorneys, it's the JD. For social workers, it's the master's, the MSW, right? Or if you're an LMFT, right, same thing, master's level. For psychologists, it's the PhD or PsyD level, right? It's typically the terminal degree, right? The point at which you qualify for the work that you want to do, right, in the marketplace. So if you're thinking about being a psychology major, then just understand it's a little bit more work in terms of investment of your time, because you need your PhD level, which is usually a little more time, a year or 2, 3, depending. So whereas a typical master's in social work, that's 2 years, 3 years part-time. So those are some definite considerations to look at. as well as dual masters, right? I was just talking about the internship, the field-based work that we do in the master's programs. If you're doing a dual master's, chances are you will need 2 years, not 1 year, when it comes to an internship. In my case, since I did criminal justice and social work, my first year internship was at a K through 12 school, private SDA school. The school I went to was for my master's was Seventh-day Adventist, so that made sense. They were affiliated. But my second year internship was more focused on forensic social work. And so since I had the extra internship, I feel like it really did a lot for my clinical skills. And it was a much more clinical setting, if you were, than my first year internship was. In fact, I was the first social worker that the school had as an intern. So in a lot of ways, I was kind of the guinea pig and helping to set up their manual for future interns and that kind of thing. And it was cool, but it was more of an academic type setting, working with a lot of younger kids and doing lessons and that kind of thing, and not so much straight therapy. Whereas my second year internship was at a youth probation camp. So I was working more with gang youth, and I learned a lot about doing, heavy duty group therapy, family therapy, working in conjunction with the Department of Corrections, probation. So it was a much richer experience, but I wouldn't have had that experience in my second internship had I not done the dual degree, right? And at the time, the school I went to offered two dual degree programs. It was either gerontology, which is working with the aging population as a second degree or a specialty, or it was forensic, right? So I went forensic. That was cool, right? Also good to know, not all programs will offer, not all schools offer like the psychology, PsyD, PhD. Some of them is just social work, MFT, that kind of thing. And so if you're unsure about which way you want to go, MSW versus PsyD or PhD, you might want to look and see if the school offers both, so you can kind of feel that out if you ever decide to add, tack that on after your master's, or if you want to maybe switch gears, if that's an option. In my case, Loma Linda, they didn't have the PsyD program at the time that I went there, or I might have considered it. I have it now, but they didn't then. The only PhD they had was in like public administration or something, which wasn't on my radar, something I wanted to do. So just things to consider when you're looking at schools, right? What's the terminal degree you're looking at? What are the pros and cons to in-house versus hybrid telehealth? Definitely, I think what I touched on with the hands-on practice, the role-playing, the internship stuff, I think that's where the big difference is. And what, if any, dual master's programs do they offer? Definite questions you want to ask when you're taking that tour, when you're doing your Googling around graduate schools. All right. So the focus, I talked a little bit about that for a second. What is the focus of your master's? Is it strictly clinical? Are you leaning more toward policy? Because there are some programs where you can elect to lean one way than the other, whether it's policy, administration, clinical, gerontology. So kind of figure out what focus options they have and which one feels right to you after you do a little bit of investigative work there. Okay. And we did touch on internships. That's definitely something you want to look at. What's their track record for internships? What's their process? Does the school place you? Do they do the work for you? Do they give you a lot of options, or they just kind of work with one or two main places and they just cycle through that? What's their track record? And you could always interview existing students who have been through the process. You can reach out to the field director, right, who handles the internships, and ask them what their process is. And to me, that's one of the most important aspects of the MSW program, is how they handle this aspect, because that's going to do a lot for preparing you for the work, right, that you'll be doing after graduate school. All right. So once you've finished up your master's, right, postgraduate phase now, there's some other considerations now we have to deal with. It's not just the right school and what the school has to offer. Now it's like, okay, now I have my master's, I have my MSW, what's next, right? What are my options? What are my considerations? And so going back to what I was talking about, maybe even with the focus of your master's, do you want to be in a clinical or non-clinical setting, right? For example, some people know they want to go into policy. Some people like the think tank type thing. They know they want to work on assembly bills and laws and advocate for the masses. And that's good to know. Some people want to go into administration. Some people want to work with children's services, right? And maybe they don't have any intention of getting their LCSW. There's plenty of social workers who get their MSW, but they don't necessarily focus on the clinical aspect. And that's a very personal decision, and it has some pretty significant implications long term, I'll touch on in just a minute. Also, considering the private versus public sector, I think it's very common for someone who is just starting out post-grad to take the first job they get or the first job they can find. I know in my case, as I was preparing to graduate from Loma Linda, that I was applying to all the counties. I was applying to Orange County, San Diego County, LA County, San Bernardino, Riverside, all of them, right? And LA County just happened to be the first one to get back to me. And at the time it was a really good commute from where I lived over, Riverside County to LA County. But I figured, hey, that's what's on the table. I'm going to take the interview. And I took it and it paid off, right? But it's important to know kind of what your risk tolerance is, or your distress tolerance, I should say, in terms of how far you're willing to relocate, how far you're willing to go for an interview, the implications, the commute. I commuted for a good year and a half. Yeah. And sometimes the drive home was 3 hours, and I would get up at 4 a.m. to get to work to beat traffic. And I did that for a year and a half before I ended up moving. And that was a long-term commitment, but it was an investment, knowing that, hey, if this get my foot in the door somewhere and, if I like it, I'll move eventually if need be. Because gas, even back then, I was spending like $800 a month in gas. It was a lot, but totally worth it. And I think just kind of looking at your options and not just taking the first thing available. And by that, I mean, like, there's a lot of private agencies, a lot of non-profit agencies that you can work for. But then one of the biggest caveats is not just your salary, but the benefits attached, as well as the hours, right? Your clinical hours. Going back to what we were talking about here before, if your goal is to be clinical, meaning you want to do therapy, you're working toward your license. If you're not careful, you can easily say yes to a job out of graduate school that is not going to make it easy for you to get your hours. You need enough clientele, you need a big enough caseload that you are doing both groups and individual therapy, right, in order to check off those hours. And at best, it's going to take you 2.5 years, pushing 3 years to get those hours just to sit for your board exams post-grad. So for me, that would be a top priority. If I was looking at a clinical track, I would definitely be looking at which of the options, private or public, are going to give me enough work, busy work, therapy that I will be able to hit my hours in a reasonable amount of time. And because the clock is ticking, once you register for your license, the clock is ticking for you to get those hours. And in a lot of cases, counties, if you don't get your license within a certain specified amount of time, you get demoted. So from therapist or whatever, caseworker, right? It's not a position you want to be in, especially, with all of the things at stake, salary, pension, all that stuff that's tied to your employer. So do yourself a favor. When you're looking for jobs outside of graduate school, make sure that you're saying yes or maybe to the places that can offer you the clinical hours that you need off the bat. Okay, that'll be important. And that doesn't have to be county mental health, but county mental health, with the whole supply and demand, you'll never be out of work and you'll have more than enough therapy clients to fill your load. If you're going to go with the private sector, just make sure that you have all of those things considered, right? Hours, etc. All right. We talked about relocation. Keep an open mind. I'm not saying that you typically need to go out of state to find a job. Like I said, there's enough supply and demand in this field. You shouldn't have any problems with finding work. It's just sometimes if you're looking at a county job, for example, you may need to commute a bit, to another county. And that's not to say you can't switch counties. Later, a lot of counties have reciprocity in terms of the pension benefits, right? So if you start with, for example, like San Bernardino County, and then eventually you want to go to LA County, right? Speaking California, then their pension plans, I believe, have reciprocity. So you don't lose that time with the county, right? Because pensions are based on time served, right? With that employer. So those are just things to consider. If you start off in private, but then something happens, you need more hours, or for whatever reason, you're not getting enough pay, you want to go county, which is very competitive, right? Pay-wise. Then you're starting fresh, right? You're starting from zero in terms of your pension time and benefits. So that's why I say it's important to kind of begin with the end in mind, in terms of what your options are, not just the first thing that's offered to you, and maybe starting off out the gate with a private online telehealth company where you can work out of the comfort of your home and you have more autonomy, and that's exactly what you want, and that's worth maybe, you'll never want to work in a 9-to-5 clinical setting in a county mental health or something, then the pension's a non-issue, right? But if you're just kind of blindly taking the first yes to a job, then you could end up regretting that later. So buyer's remorse, right? All right, so we talked about beginning there with mind. Understand too that there's a big adjustment period with any job. One of the things I see with a lot of new grads is a lot of insecurity. Am I doing this right? How can I be a better therapist? I feel overwhelmed. There's a lot of things to juggle. That's normal, right? All of that stuff's normal. Don't freak out. When you're starting off as a new therapist in any setting, well, with any job really, but especially in the field of social work, you're spinning a lot of plates. You have to switch gears quickly. You might have an idea of how your day is going to go, but that's always subject to change in the mental health space, especially when you're doing something like county mental health where there's a lot of other things going on. You have a wider range in your caseload. It's not all maybe, quote, high-functioning HMO clients, right? They want to work on some stuff. You are dealing with the homeless. You're dealing with schizophrenic. You're dealing with substance abuse disorders. You're dealing with people who are caught up in the legal system. You're dealing with people referred by Children and Family Services. And so you have such a wide range that there's a lot of case management and a lot of crisis stuff sprinkled in to the therapy. So you will be switching hats a lot. People are going to be calling out of the office, and you're going to have to pick up an intake that you didn't plan on. You're going to have to move some stuff around. So adjustment, just understand it takes 6 months to a year to kind of feel like you've got your bearings on your job, your situation. All right. All right, so now let's take a second to talk about the 3 umbrellas of social work. Not a whole lot to say here, except that we are kind of looking at the ways we can fit in to the job sector as a social worker, and the first being macro, right? In the macro type work that we do, you'd be basically the role of an advocate, right? This could, again, be policy making, lobbying for assembly bills, working in think tanks, or in higher administration. So again, take LA County, California, for example. Most of the board of supervisors that run the county, right, and mental health, the decision making, the policy decision making, where the flow of the money goes to what resources, they're mostly MSWs, right? And that's a very macro type role. Their job is to kind of direct the resources where they need to go based on the needs and what's being reported from the trenches, if you were. Now, Mezzo, that's more like institutions around the neighborhood. If you might be like a mental health liaison or a court linkage specialist where you're trying to tie people into treatment, but you're not providing the services directly. And there's plenty of roles in this area. So if you like to be the kind of the connoisseur or the middleman where you're kind of navigating people where they need to go to get linked up to treatment, and you don't necessarily want to provide that one-on-one therapy and the intakes and that kind of thing, but you love to be resourceful. You love to be helpful. You love to make sure people are getting the help they need. Then Mezzo might be the right level for you in terms of work. And you'll see that with, like in the hospital, psychiatric hospitals, that's who the discharge planner is. The discharge planner is making sure that as people are being discharged from a 5150 or a hold, that they are getting linked up to the appropriate community mental health services, outpatient mental health services, or if they're being discharged to like an IMD because they need more long-term treatment, they want to make sure that all of that linkage goes smoothly. They follow up with the clinics and so forth and make sure they have the appointments and there's nobody falls in the cracks, right? That might even be mean linking people to shelters, if they're homeless and so forth. Coordinators, right? Mental health coordinators. You see lots of these positions, especially with the county, the larger counties, and where there's a lot of moving parts. Their job is to make sure that everybody's aware of the resources, and you can even see this with housing navigators, right? Their job is to make sure that they're touching base with the housing specialists within the clinics, and they're aware of the resources and the referrals that come through for certain housing programs. So that's really big right now because homelessness is huge, and mental health happens to be one of the go-to resources for the homeless based on the funding. So you'll see a lot of positions like navigators for that reason. All right, so micro social work, that's pretty much the main thing you'll see in the mental health space. That's that individual therapy type outpatient mental health clinic stuff. Doing the individual work, you're in the trenches, you're dealing with the most vulnerable populations, and this could be providing services either inpatient, like the psychiatric hospital, or outpatient mental health clinics. But that's pretty much how social work is broke down, in terms of service. Right? Does that make sense? Cool. All right. So, the pros of a career in social work. Some things that you definitely are in our favor, right? The first being massive opportunity, right? Massive opportunity in terms of the supply and demand we were talking about. There's just a countless amount of jobs that you can find in social work in one facet or another, just because there's not enough. There's not enough social workers out there doing the work, or MFTs, or PsyDs. The whole aspect of the mental health space. We need all the help we can get, right? So there's always opportunity, right? Another thing, not that there's truly such thing as job stability, but because of that massive opportunity and demand, you have a lot of job stability, right? You'll never have to wonder, like, am I going to be out of work for the most part, right? I realize that there's always, with the economy and everything, the job market gets affected. But when it comes to, will I ever be unemployed? Probably not as a social worker, right? There's always something you can find to do, whether that's remote, working from home, part-time, full-time, inpatient, outpatient, at any of those levels we talked about. There's always something that can be done, okay? All right, and lateral shifts, right? So not only is there massive opportunity in the social work field, there's a lot of movement, right? Even within departments, right? Again, take LA County Mental Health, for example. Huge, biggest mental health provider, probably county in the United States. A lot of movement you can make, right? And I bring this up because one of the biggest threats, right? Public enemy number one in the mental health work is burnout, compassion fatigue, right? And if you start to feel that, one of the best things you can do, if you can't take a little respite, take some break, find ways to decrease the stress and in your workplace and your caseload. If you need a Hail Mary, you can always switch laterally within the same employer, right? If it's like county-based mental health. And that will help kind of refresh, reframe kind of your perspective, your role. Maybe, for example, you're working in an outpatient directly operated clinic. You're providing mental health services, but you're starting to feel burnt out. You're feeling a little compassion fatigue. What you need is a reboot, right? So you might decide to apply for a lateral shift to like a field-based program, or maybe a program where you don't have a caseload, like a PMRT, be like a psychiatric emergency response team. And so you're going out, you don't have a caseload, you go out, you assess, you do 5150s as necessary, or link to mental health services, and that's it. You know, you don't have a caseload. So it's a different kind of feel, it's a different kind of day, right? Work day. And that gives you kind of the refresh you need so you don't feel burnt out anymore. And then you can always go back, right, to doing the outpatient stuff if you need to, the directly operated stuff. But there's always options, as well as contract work, right? So with contract work, you know, sometimes you keep doing the day-to-day, the 9 to 5 thing that you're starting to feel burnt out on, but you add on a little contract work, a little something different, and that gives you enough sense of autonomy, enough, you know, something different that it sparks your interest again. And even though it's technically more work than you're already doing, it's a different kind of work, and then that just kind of re-energizes the passion for the work you're doing because you're serving a different population in a different kind of way. Does that make sense? Okay. We'll talk more about contract side work opportunities and options, right? All right, so part 3 here, making positive impact. That's a definite benefit. That's a pro of this work in social work. The reason most people get into this space in the first place, right, is because we want to make a difference. And like I said initially, that's oftentimes because people who get into this space have had some bumps in life, right? And they've been through some challenging times, and they've had someone who has made a difference in their life, and so now we're paying it forward, right? I know that's definitely my case, right? I want to pay forward all of the blessings that kept me on the right track and my head in the right place and helped me through hard times. And like when I talk with my clients, I'll say, like, there's the assumption that where you begin in life determines where you end up, but that's not true. That's a myth, right? I'm living proof of it. I know a lot of people who are. And so the work we do is sometimes helping people work past their assumptions and their own limiting beliefs, right? And we do that by way of cognitive therapy. We do that also by way of resources and showing them there are other ways, right, to attain the things they want and push through a lot of that self-doubt, those self-esteem issues that we see that coincide with depression and anxiety and trauma and substance abuse. And we help them reframe and have that schema shift that then they have that aha, right? But that takes, you know, a person who is wanting to be of service, and that's what makes social work such a powerful thing, is because you need that core aspect to be of service, to make a difference, to be that guide at times for someone who needs it. So that's definitely a pro, right? You get to have some sense of personal fulfillment in the work that you do, right? That's probably at the core of social work. And upward mobility, right? One of the pros of a career in social work is there's plenty of opportunity to move up in your roles and what you do, right? Depending on, no matter really where you start off in this work, there's always upward mobility. And yes, there's a certain ceiling with certain job titles, but there's a lot of ways that we can climb the ladder in other aspects, right? Other types of roles. So you might start off making 60 grand or something, 64 grand with a master's degree. But the ceiling, like for example, if you work for the county, they have a step system. And once you hit the ceiling, you make maybe six figures at the top step. And then once you hit the ceiling there, you have other options. You can go clinical supervisor. You can maybe from there go to clinical department head or program head or chief if you want to keep climbing that ladder within the same system. Or you make a lateral shift that has more upward mobility, right? Maybe you hit the ceiling on this ladder, but then you can switch ladders and go up further. And that would be like, for example, okay, so I hit the ceiling on maybe clinical social worker 2 or whatever it is, but maybe if you switch laterally to like the court system, maybe the court has more upward mobility to like mediator, right? Or sometimes it's referred to as a family service court specialist, right? Where you're doing mediation for the divorce court or something like that. And from there, there's a supervisor there. You follow me? So there's sometimes a lateral shift you can make to make more of an upward shift. So lots of options. You get to build meaningful relationships, right? I think social work is one of those amazing professions where we have the opportunity to both be autonomous, right? Because we spend a lot of our time one-on-one with clients, we're in rooms, we are siloed to a large degree, but then we all come together, right? And we support each other in the work that we do, and we bounce ideas off of each other, and we are better for it, right? We learn from each other, we support each other, and it's easy to make some of your best friends in this work with other therapists, right? Because of the work that you do together, because it's deep work and you have a shared mission. And there's a lot of that that sense of ethics that are binding you together and the hardship and the challenges that come with it. So definitely, and maybe if you're working strictly in telehealth, it could be a little different, but there's still ways to connect with other therapists, even if you're working strictly telehealth. All right. And so there's also a plethora of career options and self-employment, right? We talked a little bit about that in terms of career options. If you would like, I can certainly elaborate on that and just let me know. Okay. But the career options, again, inpatient, outpatient, county mental health, private sector, the superior court, contract work, like I had mentioned, like I do contract work for the court via the PACE panel. That is one form you can do. I will say a lot of the self-employment options and contract work and that kind of thing will come from being licensed. I know a few slides ago I was saying, depending on which route you're going to go, if you want to go clinical or non-clinical, just know that's one of the opportunity costs with not putting in the time to get your license and your hours to take your exam for your license, is that it will limit you long term for some of the other types of work you can do. So I do encourage anyone who's starting off in the social work profession, it's probably a good idea to start out the gate, getting your hours, getting your license, and then you can pretty much do anything else that you want. If you want to get out of direct service, that's fine. But that license stays with you, and you can always leverage it later if you need to or want to, via contract work, self-employment, whatever. You can do a lot with it, is what I'm saying. But you have a lot of career options. It's just thinking about what's going to be your main bread and butter, and then long term, what do you want to see yourself doing? And then work backwards. And then also consider, like, as you get licensed, as you get more experienced, other opportunities will start to become available to you, right? And if you have any questions about some of that, just let me know. All right. Compensation and logistics, right? So these are some of the cons we touched on. So when it comes to compensation, who you work for makes a big difference in terms of obviously what you can make in social work. And social work sometimes gets a bad rap, right? Because of all the investment, and especially if you go to private school, a lot of the money you put into your master's degree, but it's not it's not always comparable with the money you make. Sometimes I refer it to like if you play Monopoly, Baltic Avenue, that purple one. It's kind of like one of the least valuable properties on the board compared to the other ones, but you put a hotel on it and it'll give you a run for your money. And you can do more with it. I think of the MSW as kind of that way. It's better than it used to be. It's not an engineering degree. You're not going to make 150, 200 out the gate, like with some other specialized degrees. But the master's is like having the hotel, and then you get the license on top of it. And it's like having the monopoly with all having hotels and maybe some extra houses. It's more competitive. And so also who you work for, right? So if you get a job with the county right out of graduate school, they're going to pay, like I said, maybe 60, 70 grand. You can always look up on the HR site and see what I'm talking about, but it'll show you the range. But then every year you get like an automatic raise. And depending on where you are and where you live, in the United States or abroad, there's going to be different compensation. In California and LA County, the county is very competitive, right, with the private market. And it's salaried, right? So if you have no shows or whatever, then you still get paid, right? Whereas if you were in the private sector, you're probably paid based on how many sessions you complete a day, and you get a percentage of that. If you work for an agency, they take a cut, so you get even less versus like if you had your own practice, for example, right? And so it just really depends on the breakdown and who you're working for, what the agreements are. But don't negate either benefits, right? For the county, for example, if you work for a county mental health, it may not be the highest pay, but you're also getting compensated with usually really good benefits, right? Health benefits, pension, things like that. So that you should factor in to your salary. I heard it said once, like if you are working for yourself, right? If you go from like county work to private work, you want to make at least 1.5 times your county salary in order to compensate for the benefit package that you would have had. And so those are things that you probably want to think about as part of I call it a con just because it's a little confusing for some people. Like I said, the landscape is not linear, right? There's a lot kind of like choose your own adventure kind of stuff in this field. And so knowing what your options are will make a big difference. Time management. This is one of the cons I say, because if you're not used to juggling and pivoting a lot and switching gears quickly, this could be a big hurdle for you if you're new to social work, right? Is figuring out, okay, so I'm feeling overwhelmed, what's going on, and being very systematic about the way that you're managing your time. Something as simple as like keeping up with your progress notes, right? Or keeping up with your voicemails, or how to prioritize. Okay, I have 10 voicemails I need to catch up on. I have 3 intakes, 10 progress notes. I have a meeting at 3 o'clock and ... right? And that can become overwhelming. And so having a system in place where you know how to prioritize what in which order and triage that and have a system to keep up with things, right? Over time you develop these things. It's something that I'm very passionate about, is kind of systems and managing my time, because managing your time is managing your stress, right? The less stressed you are, the better social worker you will be, right? Because you're not going to be preoccupied as much with all of the stuff that's pending, right? So I like to have 0 things pending as much as possible, so that I can dedicate all of my undivided attention to the person sitting in front of me. All right. We talked a little bit about burnout, compassion fatigue. That's a definite con in this field, is because burnout is a real thing. And if we're not careful with the time management, then burnout is on the horizon, right? So these things are all related in that sense. As well as we talked about, one of the reasons that we have burnout, compassion fatigue is because of the multiple demands, right? And so just like we teach our clients as much as possible, how do we divide and conquer, right? If we don't plan, we plan to fail, so on and so forth. Tired eyes rarely see a bright future, and all that good stuff. So we want to be very careful that we are paying attention to what's working and what's not working in our day, what's causing us to feel overwhelmed. For me, it could be something as simple as making sure that I honor my break and I take a power nap in the car or on the couch behind me or wherever I am, that I'm making a very conscious effort to take care of my body, take care of myself, and then manage what I can and know that, okay, what can roll over, but I can only do what I can do. And just being very real with ourselves and having honest conversations with your peers and management and so forth. So, you're not feeling alone, right? And everybody knows what the state of affairs are. And again, on a clinic level, even what's working, what's not working. So that's how you address some of these cons. Just keep in mind, these are going to be your challenges in this field. Definitely time management, multiple demands, and burnout. Okay. Keep in mind, like we talked about, yes, one of the con is that there's another barrier, to upward mobility, and that is your license, right? It is just, finishing graduate school feels like a huge accomplishment, and it is, but that's, checkpoint one. Checkpoint two is get your hours. We talked about that. Make sure you find a good clinic if that's your intention, and I suggest you do. That where you can accumulate your hours as quickly as possible. That's going to be a minimum 2.5, 3 years, so that you can sit for that LCSW and get that box checked off. Once you do that, all kinds of doors can open up for you. But I put that as a con just because it's an extra hurdle, right? Whereas maybe in some other professions, you don't have that much of a delay, right? With maybe registered nursing or something, you still have to sit for your boards and everything, but maybe there's not as much of a delay to getting that credential as with some other fields. But that's because we do important work, and it's they want to make sure that we're on the up and up. Okay, so obviously this is related, right, to some of the other stuff like burnout, is that we're working with challenging individuals. Working with challenging individuals goes hand in hand, right, with social work, because they are in a position that is challenging them, right? And hence we're trying to help them solve those challenges. So be that the homeless, be that substance abuse, be that trauma, whatever it is, our job is to help clients figure out, or the public, whoever we're serving, even on a macro level, what are some of the social problems that are insidious and repetitive, and things like recidivism and social inequality, all that stuff, right? These social problems, that's what social work is about. But with that, just understand that you're going to be working with a lot of challenging situations, a lot of challenging people. And so going back to that the antidote for that is the self-care, right? And being very mindful about what we can control and what we can't. I know it's one of the biggest things with new social workers is they want to help everybody, right? They want to put on their cape and feel like they can make a huge difference, and that's important. But what you'll learn over time is, as a social worker, it's a long game. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And so when you see those small wins, when you see that progress with somebody you're working on, or a policy you're working on, whatever it is, take the wins, right? Because it is a long game, and progress is not linear. Just like we tell clients, it's important to honor the successes and the wins, right? Because we're faced with so many challenges, right? And we're sitting side by side with our clients who are dealing with these challenges, and so it's easy for us to kind of sometimes lose perspective, just like clients do, right? The people we work with. All right, so career options. I want to walk through some career options as we move through this. Some considerations. Consideration one, a lot of discrepancy exists, we talked about, between path and income, county, private, public sectors, which leads to confusion and missed opportunity. Like we talked about, you don't know what you don't know. And so one of the best things you can do is educate yourself on your options and opportunities. Be that way of talking to your HR, going onto the websites, looking at doing some deep searches, some deep dive searches on websites like Glassdoor.com, Indeed, LinkedIn, and looking at some of those keywords around social work, mental health, coordinator, and trying to just see what's already in the marketplace and try and do some compare and contrast analysis to figure out, okay, so what are my options? Even if it's, 10 steps ahead, how does one get there? What is that position? How do you work backwards? Because some are pretty straightforward, like therapist, but some are not so straightforward, like I talked about, like that court mediator type position. So it's important to kind of know what are all of the options. If you had a bird's eye view and a map, and you can kind of see like the outliers and then, of course, the main things, it'll give you perspective. All right. Um, Thanks, the pandemic really stunk, right, with COVID-19. But one of the benefits of the pandemic is that it opened up the world of telehealth, right? Which was kind of taboo before the pandemic. And then it was the only thing. And then all of a sudden it was uh, about access to care and it opened up doors. And now it's just the norm, right? Telehealth. So understand that telehealth is completely normalized now. And that's a great, perfect career path, especially if you want autonomy. But again, one of the prereqs to this is probably going to be getting your LCSW first if you want to get into this field, but that could be a long-term goal, right? All right, so clinical, right? We talked about outpatient versus inpatient job options, right? If you want a county mental health outpatient versus a psychiatric hospital inpatient, you can do medical social work. Again, medical social work might be kind of a little adjacent to LCSW type work, depends. But I would still encourage you to get the LCSW just so that you have more options long term. Specialized programs such as FSP, housing, etc. Keep an eye out for those too. MET is like a program where you work with a sheriff's department and you travel with a sheriff or a police officer to certain calls, mental health related, and you work hand in hand with the officer to mitigate the stress and the conflict and help make sure that the individual is getting the help they need and things aren't being taken out of context. So again, specialized programs are something to consider and look for. Talk a little bit about the court legal aspect, right? You could work within the court as a mental health advocate, mental health liaison. You can work as a mental health linkage coordinator. You can work with the public defender's office and do what are called mitigation reports for the public defenders on inmates for people who are maybe on trial for murder or other crimes. And you're doing like basically a social assessment to look at those contributing factors, mitigating factors that put them in that position in the first place. And then the public defenders use that information to then make a case to the DA for like a mental health diversion program and things of that sort. So that could be just a social worker with the public defender's office. That could also be, like I said, you could work as a mediator for the family court. That is known in LA County as a family service support specialist. But in other counties like Orange County, that may be a very different title. Sometimes it's just mediator or mediator 1 or mediator 2. And there's higher criteria for positions like that. I will say mediator was my long-term goal when I was in college, one of my long-term goals. But in order to qualify for that position, you typically need to be 5 years post-licensed, I believe, not just licensed. So there's a higher barrier to entry for a position like that, but they also make more, right? They typically even make more than clinical supervisors in the clinical setting. So just food for thought. There's a lot of different options and different sectors that you wouldn't typically think about, and maybe they don't talk about in your MSW program where you're attending, right? And there's that thing I talked about, like the expert witness, right? Something you can do in a contract role for the public defender via like the PACE panel with a superior court. Again, kind of a coveted position, so oftentimes there's a wait list for those. But that would be kind of the same thing as a social worker who works for the public defender, but instead of working in-house, you're working as a contract worker, right? That's an interesting aspect, another way you can kind of contract. There's other things you can do too, but that's kind of the court legal aspect. We talked about like linkage roles, such as court linkage, mental health department, court, housing navigator, etc. You can also do work for schools, private schools, as like a adjunct professor. And fun fact, if you work for a private school, I don't think you need your teaching credentials. So you can just apply to be like adjunct faculty role for teaching social work or something like that. And then they can always draw from you to teach a class or a semester or whatever, field-based liaison, whatever, supervisor, depending on what the school needs. But just food for thought. It never hurts to get on those lists in case they call you or they need something. It's kind of like sub-teaching, I guess, at the graduate level. Program analysts. I don't know exactly what they do, but whenever I see that title pop up, I know they make money. Usually within the county systems and so forth. Program analysts in the mental health space, for example, look, again, probably more at the Mezzo or macro level of how things are moving within the county programs, and they're trying to use their mental health experience to advise the program, I imagine. But I can't really speak to program analysts so much because it's nothing I have personally worked in, but that's something you might want to look at maybe on the HR website of the county or wherever you are, right? Program analyst. But that's another one you typically have to work into, and it's a little left field of direct work. So there's probably some sidestepping you have to do, maybe some quality assurance positions or something like that to get into the field, like even within the same employer of that. QA is quality assurance. That's more like, checking the charts, making sure all of the requirements of the state, etc., are being met, of the Board of Behavioral Sciences, all the consent forms are in there where they should be, and that's like usually an internal QA kind of thing, in case the agency or whoever ever gets audited, making sure that treatment is being managed in a timely fashion so that insurance doesn't deny certain claims and that kind of thing. So that's quality assurance. If that's your cup of tea and you don't want to work directly with clients or patients, then that's one way to go. We talked about community liaison, hospital discharge planning, medical social work, hospice, gerontology. So again, all kinds of things you can consider as a social worker. Social services. So this could fall under something like a family foster agency, where you're kind of a middleman. I did this actually while I was in graduate school. Before I graduated, I was working as a family foster agency contract social worker. So I'd be assigned certain children in their homes, and then I would go and I would make sure that they were being well taken care of. And this was in addition to what the county social worker was doing. So it was kind of like an extra pair of eyes to make sure the kids were okay. And I would provide counseling as needed, and do my quarterly reports and do my home visits. And that was a good gig as a graduate student. So make a note of that. If you're in school right now and you're looking for a way to make money, that's something you could look at, an FFA social worker. And then, of course, Department of Children and Family Services, or CPS, whatever it's called, where you are. That's definitely a way to go. Again, a lot of those positions don't require licensure, but I would still encourage you to consider moving toward licensure before you just do something direct in social services, because time's going to pass either way. And it might be a good idea to get your hours first. Okay. Crisis response, we talked a little bit about that. MET, working with the sheriff's department. Access is usually like the 24-hour crisis hotline, whatever county has, takes the calls and then sends out teams like the PMRT, which you can also work on, which is the Crisis Mobile Response Team, Psychiatric Mobile Response Team. And there's probably a different name for every county or whatever, but same idea. You can work with the sheriff's department, the call center, or the response team, right? And that's kind of your crisis options. And within the clinic setting, there's always the mental health clinical supervisor. Like if you're looking to move up to that, obviously you need to be licensed, you need to have enough time under your belt, but you can always move up to that, and they tend to pay like, 10-ish thousand more than the line worker position. But then from there, you can move up to like program manager and so forth. So again, it depends on what track you're looking to go toward. And if you continue from mental health clinical supervisor, you can move up to program head, clinical director, area chief, etc., and then maybe director of mental health for a county or something, or a hospital or a psychiatric inpatient facility, like a Tascadero or something like that, depending on if you want to be more on the justice side of things or directly mental health or IMD. So lots of options there if you want to get into more of a program head, clinical director type of position. We talked about policy, such as board of supervisors, county-wide director, etc. And getting familiar with the terminology is really important. So that's why I really encouraged you to look at websites and HR sites like Glassdoor.com, going to the human resources website and learning the terminology before you start looking for jobs. So you have an idea of what to look for. And each county, for example, will have a different name for the same thing. They're usually called items, but job titles, right? If you have any interest, I could do a walkthrough with you now, but if not, then we'll forego it. I'll give you 10 seconds to decide. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'll forego it. If you change your mind, let me know. I can show you a walkthrough of how to kind of look through the HR website to find different jobs. Okay? All right. Well, I could not cover everything in this episode, but hopefully you know more than you did before hanging out with me today and can use this knowledge to further advance your career, or at least get you off on a better foot. So I hope you enjoyed that. Some other things to consider. What do you want to know more about when it comes to this exciting field of social work? Let me know how I can help you overcome your challenges. You can use the comment section here to ask me questions for future videos or live streams. You can also use the contact form on the website, and I'll be sure to follow up with those and add them to the queue for future topics. So before we end things, are there any last questions? I'll give it a few seconds. And again, you can go to the mentalhealthtoolbox.com/contact if you have any topic requests you would like me to follow up on. You can leave a physical comment there in the form, or there's also a way you can use an audio file, right? You can record your voice and just leave me a message there through SpeakPipe on the website. And then, then I'll do my best to answer your questions. All right. Any last questions, comments, concerns? All right. Well, I appreciate everyone who's able to join us. Again, if you found this helpful or you're watching the replay, please put #replay and share the video with anyone who you think might benefit. If you would like more videos like this, please just let me know, and I would be happy to prioritize this type of content. I know I do a lot of podcasting, interview content on this channel as well, but it helps me if I know what you are benefiting from, since I'm here to be of service. All right. That being said, I hope everyone has a fantastic day. Thanks for watching, and you have a fantastic week. Take care. Bye-bye.